Hello and welcome to Inside Update, brought to you by InsideInvestigator.org, a nonprofit newsroom working to root out corruption in the state of Connecticut. My name is Connor Dragotis. I'm the managing editor and also the proud, not so proud owner of a mid-October cold, so you'll have to excuse my voice throughout this. And I am joined today by Catherine Revelo to talk about her newest investigation. It's personal, how your information is being exposed through FOIA. And then we are also going to talk about a situation that unfolded at UConn where a professor resigned over their relationship with a student. So hold on for that one as well. Catherine and I have a surprising amount to talk about with that story, which she didn't even write, but it is still really important that we chat about some of the questions there. Before we get to that, let's talk about freedom of information, though, and some of the ways that Connecticut residents' personal information is kind of being splashed out there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this story actually started as a tip where somebody said to us, hey, did you know that if you ask for the email lists of hunting and fishing licenses, you get not only people's names back, but their cell phone numbers, their email addresses, and their residential addresses. And this is true not only for Connecticut residents, but even if you don't live in the state and even if you don't live in the country. I think we got addresses from, it was like over a dozen different countries around the world, where if you've happened to hunt or fish in Connecticut, and by the way, we can tell what kind of license you had and potentially what kind of gun you used. But all that information is just kind of, out there and available for anybody to get. And it's not just hunting and fishing licenses, it's also things like parking licenses. We have the same set of data from the city of Hartford, where if you've paid for a parking pass, potentially somebody out there can see where you live, can see how to contact you, and all of that sort of stuff, which, I don't know about you, Connor, but I care a lot about, the privacy of my information, especially with the kind of work that we do. And, I don't always think if I'm going to, get a basic government service that I need to go about my daily life, not always suspecting that that information is going to be publicly available.
Yeah, I am similarly a private person. And, when I'm doing home renovations, for example, I don't particularly need my neighbor saying, "Hey, look, I saw you spent 10 grand on a new bathroom," because I looked it up and the contractor you used, did you know that's my brother? It just opens up doors where people can be put in situations, not just interpersonally, but my understanding from this is that there's a broader scope that's a security risk for scammers. I mean, if I can lift where you live, what kind of gun you have, your fishing habits, all of a sudden I can put together a pretty comprehensive profile about who Catherine is. And that's not always white hat folks who are going to be accessing that information, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We talked to a couple of, kind of online privacy, digital security experts for the story. And the long and the short of it is like, it might not be the biggest concern because this is obviously not the only way that your personal information is out there. Spoiler, it's probably out there, but this could be used to obtain more information about you. And it could be used, in a variety of scams. People can do things like, go to the post office and have your mail forwarded without that information and you'd never know about it. So, stuff like that, personal identity. Um, is at risk. There's also a concern here, right? We've seen, a lot of protests that target people at their homes, especially with things like Supreme Court justices. So, if you're doing, certain activities like, going out and hunting, do you necessarily want the people you work with to know about that? Could you potentially be the target, of a group that doesn't like the activities that you're doing? All of that is a concern. The other part of this story, which I think is some recognition by the state that yes, this could be concerning, is if you're a public official or if you work for certain state agencies, the information is the data that we got from the Hartford Parking Authority, people who were things like EMTs, ambulance their information was redacted. There is a specific exemption in FOIA for them because there's a realization that, that could be a privacy concern. There are also legitimate reasons why you might want to know that information, things like, residency requirements for politicians. But the point is, there's a double standard there where if you work for the government, then you have an extra level of security that you don't if you're just a normal citizen and you're using, government services that you kind of have to use if you want to participate in, 21st century American life.
It really does put people in a tough situation. And I did see, there were kind of two camps that people seem to fall into. We do read the comments, at least I do. That's part of the job. I do not encourage my reporters to necessarily read the comments. But when I was looking through this, there were a number of folks who said, hey, there is some concern here. Like basically, am I on the list? And the second group was, pretty specific about the fact that this is in some ways like a de facto gun registry for the state of Connecticut. I did not see many folks be like, "Oh yeah, this is great. My information is out there." Did you get the sense that there is an argument, or could you share a little bit more about the argument of, why is this information being collected but then retained and held onto in a way that can be shared instead of, hey, we did it, we did the due diligence, now let's delete it out of the system? Is that even an option or something that's been considered?
I haven't seen it recently. One of the things that we mentioned in this piece is, there's a lot of efforts to reform FOIA every time the legislature is in session. A lot of those efforts are focused on protecting, again, government officials' information. One of the bills from the last session was an attempt to make basically any kind of document that UConn creates exempt from FOIA. But, if there are not a lot of efforts that are focused on general citizens. And again, we talked to the Electronic Frontier Foundation as part of this, right? And their concern was, clearly this is a balancing test. People deserve privacy, but also anything government is involved in, the public has a right to know. But it's a question of how deep should that information be? Is there a public interest in knowing who has been hunting and fishing in the state? Yeah, probably there is. Is there a public interest in knowing exactly where those people live? No, probably there isn't. So, those were the kind of reform efforts that were suggested that maybe we should be looking at.
Fascinating. I don't know if it was an intentional transition to mention UConn and their transparency practices, but I don't want to cut this off though, because I mean, more or less, I want people to go read the investigation. There's so much in here. There's so much more to this. But is there anything else that you want to share before we kind of talk about UConn and some of their
Yeah,
transparency
absolutely.
practices?
Yeah, I mean, probably the only other thing I want to mention is, right, we don't actually know what the scope of this problem is because we submitted a couple of other FOIA requests that we haven't gotten back. Shocker, I know, Connor. Um, so, there may be other cases where you can submit these kinds of requests and get people's information. And if you're aware of them, we would love to hear about them because this is the kind of stuff that we want to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Yeah, transparency is a turnkey to uncovering a lot of corruption. It's kind of an early piece in that puzzle, right? It's one of the corners before you start building out the rest of the image. Let's talk about UConn then. And I'll just share a little bit of background about where we stand as an organization, because we have requested from every single institute of higher education in the state of Connecticut documentation from 2018 to present of basically physical and sexual abuse by faculty and staff against students. And one of the problems that we're running into is that we have been waiting on that information and that request for over a year. And it has gotten kind of contentious. We've not been getting the responses that we need. And so about a month ago, we received a tip that a undergraduate student was being financially taken advantage of by a professor who she was dating. And that really raised some eyebrows and some questions. And basically, the long story short is we did end up publishing a story on this topic. Specifically, the headline was UConn professor resigns over relationship with student. And that's really important because of the when we published. But I want to dig into this, I guess, from the pulling back the curtain on some journalistic decision making. that we had to do. So I think I'll start with a Reddit comment, which I think this will be a first time. I don't normally think that Reddit is the best place for deep, meaningful conversation in a balanced way. But every once in a while, we do read these comments and we want to respond to them because folks bring up really important points that leads us to believe we need to do a better job or be a leader on sharing how to make good decisions in newsrooms. So the comment in part reads, hey, with all this in mind, this is not a news story. The guy seems to have initiated this situation, and I can imagine something criminal occurred, but the story doesn't say that, which means there is no reason everyone needs to read about this gossip. I'm sure the lady in question would prefer no one knew about this, and if you already know about it, hopefully you forget about it. If it were me, I wouldn't want this story to come up whenever you Google my name. Thankfully, her name isn't in the story, and I hope it stays that way. There's a lot to unpack. So that's the end of the quote. And I think the part of this that I wanted to talk about, and Catherine, um, Alex wrote this story, but you were involved in this decision-making process from the first, because when someone comes in and they have a tip that's of a sensitive nature, we want to involve multiple people who can ask good questions, be there as a legal safeguard as well to make sure that we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's. But I guess lay out for us a little bit. You were part of these conversations. Why was this not a news story initially, and why did it become a news story? And I'm not just laying this on your plate. We can chat back and forth about it, but I know you had some really good thoughts as we chatted about this internally.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started this, right, right, I don't want to call her a girl because I don't want to infantilize her, but the student, the young woman who is involved in this, had come forward to us and said, hey, this has been going on. I was in a relationship with this former professor of mine, and I've been financially taken advantage of. I've reached out, right? She was put in a position where she couldn't afford to go to the university anymore. And, I think because of that, felt like she couldn't go through the university's process for dealing with this, but had started to and wasn't necessarily satisfied with what was happening. So I think was looking for another outlet, somebody who would be able to help her and tell her story. Right. And initially we met with her. We had a couple of conversations. I know you followed up with emails, and didn't feel like because she didn't have, like documenting text messages, of her relationship with this guy. She did provide us some financial stuff, that showed, the abuse that had been going on, but we didn't feel like it was necessarily concrete enough to do anything about. So we were in a process where we were, I believe, talking to her, asking if she would be willing to share more documents as the investigation with the university moved forward. And then the professor was fired, which we learned about from another news story. So we were not the first people to see journalistic merit in this story. And once that happened, we felt like there was a story here, especially because I personally reached out to UConn on a couple of different fronts to ask about, and I'm sorry, not only was he fired, but she was readmitted to the university, even though her GPA had dropped below. So it seemed like they made an exception in this case, perhaps because they're aware that, she potentially has a lawsuit here. That's speculation. I don't know, but we did reach out to the university to try to find out some more information, to find out what their policy on readmitting students is, the grounds when they will bend that, as well as, hey, this guy has resigned. Is he going to face any other sort of repercussions for this? Is the investigation going to continue? Is he going to benefit financially at all? And we didn't get any answer from them. So, at that point, we felt like this was a story and we felt like, there was merit to it, right? Especially since UConn's not going to talk publicly. Obviously, the people who are involved in this are probably not going to talk publicly. So clearly there was wrongdoing here, but if it becomes kind of an invisible issue, which as you mentioned, Connor, this has already been an invisible issue because there have been documented cases of, sexual, financial, academic abuse at UConn between professors and students, but the university won't talk to us. They won't respond to our FOIA requests. So, at some point, somebody has got to publicly say something about it.
Absolutely. And I think the only thing that I would clarify, my understanding is that he resigned once he realized that the investigation was actually being acted on by the school. I do not believe that he was fired.
Yes.
I know that might be splitting hairs, but I think that that's important to
Yeah,
mention.
yeah, you're correct. I believe he resigned.
And I also think that it's important to not even clarify, but just reiterate what you're saying. I mean, we know that there are structural issues here. The Yukon situation that you mentioned, Capital Community College, in both of those, which we have written about, the professors were definitely found guilty of what they were accused of: inappropriate relationships, financial, sexual, physical. There were a number of problems in both of those. But the professors in both of those cases were allowed to basically resign after they had collected their maximum pension. So there was no real accountability. They just kind of continued to expose these individuals to students where further harm could happen. And then, okay, cool. Now that you've qualified for your pension, you're free to go and kind of walk away with this golden parachute that really, I mean, our job, to get back to the Reddit comment, the reason we didn't make this a news story in the beginning is because our mission is to root out corruption. And, it was a little gossipy. There's a lot of he said, she said before. But once you start looking into the structural elements of a resignation and what the financial pieces are there, there's some real, I guess, the possibility for some really ugly stuff to happen that's going to come at the expense of Connecticut taxpayers, other Connecticut students. We do have an interest in trying to root out future corruption, or at least identifying areas where that might occur. Yeah, just it was a really ugly story generally, and I was glad to see that this undergraduate, is going to get another chance to finish up her degree and hopefully move forward with that. But we will definitely still be interested to see what happens with this professor. Because again, it's a black box. We don't know what's happening. We're not quite clear what the rules are. They don't necessarily seem to be implemented consistently. We would like to hear from you if you are aware of situations where these kind of things have occurred. Please reach out to us because the schools aren't giving us the information that we need to do our jobs properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is important to say because it touches on another important reason why we do stories like this is especially because it's a black box, especially because the university is obviously not going to comment on this type of stuff. If you're a victim of this, it might seem like nobody is paying attention, nobody is saying anything, certainly publicly, there's not a lot going on. But, doing stories like this is hopefully going to let people know, hey, we are paying attention to this. Hey, we are, interested in reporting on this and, is hopefully going to make people feel more comfortable coming forward and talking to organizations like ours.
I think that, the buck stops with us in many ways. I can't tell you how many tips we have gotten in the last, 2.5 years now, that say something along the lines of, I went to the police. I didn't get the response I needed. I went to the school. I didn't get the response I needed. I went to whatever the supposed governing authority is, or I went to other news organizations and no one really took me seriously. Those have turned into some of our most impactful investigations, because I love this about our team. We make no guarantees of coverage, of course, right? That's just smart legal boilerplate. But on the other side, I can absolutely promise we will always listen, that we will always actually review the documentation that you send over. And even if it's something that isn't actionable or something that we're not able to move on right now, we're going to keep a record of it and we're going to refer back to it if that continues. And I think we need to always keep that in mind. If we're going to hold on to this information, it might be 2 years from now, but at least we'll have it in the hopper in case we need to have it to reference back to at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's a time limit on this sort of stuff, right? And I mean, there can't be, especially when it takes UConn a year plus to respond to pretty basic requests for information.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So, anyways, thank you, Reddit, for providing us with an important conversation topic. The user was PinkUMB, posting in the Connecticut subreddit. And actually, it was nice. We didn't even post the article. That was just a reader who posted it in there and got some exposure for us. So, huge thank you To that, it did generate a number of other tips already and some good conversations. I think it's important that we're having these kind of conversations and that we're open to it. Reporters and investigative reporters, especially, are very busy people with good reason. You guys are working on a lot. So if we can pull back the curtain and help everyone in Connecticut understand not just how to help us do our jobs well, but every single newsroom in Connecticut is a great resource. And that's really what we should be doing as journalists, is making sure that we are serving the community to the best of our ability.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially since I think a lot of good journalism is invisible to the public. There's a lot of stuff that, maybe we have a conversation about ethically whether we can publish this right now. And the answer is we can't, because the sourcing's not there, or, we're missing something. And so, there are stories that don't get told that, people don't see those decisions because they happen behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can think of maybe 30 stories right now that are just sitting, waiting for someone to email us back, or someone to, get that FOIA returned finally, or, send us the video that you keep mentioning. We want to see it so we can validate what actually happened here. Thank you, Catherine. I enjoyed your investigation. It was great. Thank you for your help as well. Just managing and going through with these really important conversations with you, me, and Alex too, especially with this, trying to tackle these. To everyone watching, listening, and tuning in, thank you for your support. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are a nonprofit. So that means that we survive and thrive exclusively through donations made by the public to support our mission to root out corruption through investigative journalism. We would love to earn your support. We would also love your feedback. How can we be better? Whether that's our website, how can this podcast or show be better? How can our journalism be better? I would think we really have a lot of pride in our newsroom that we listen to that kind of feedback. We think it's vitally important, and it has made us better at what we do. With that in mind, thank you again. Hugely appreciative of all of you. We'll be back in 2 weeks. And until then, be well, stay safe, and stay informed.